Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Historic County Courthouse Rehabilitation Grant Program. Today, we are lucky to have Chris Moore, the Executive Director of the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, who is here to share with us some background and resources available to counties. All attendees are muted for this presentation. However, we do encourage questions, and there are a few ways to get yours answered. You can click raise hand on the lower part of the webinar window, or you can type your question by clicking in the Q&A box in the lower part of the webinar window. This webinar is also being recorded, and a link will be provided to you within 48 hours. The webinar will also be added to our YouTube page, which can be found by going to www.wasac.org. Thank you again for joining today, and now I welcome Chris Moore.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason, and thanks to all of you who are joining us and signing in virtually today. I really appreciate it. I'm going to jump right in and share a screen here. I just want to reiterate what Jason mentioned with regard to questions. Don't hesitate to type in a question at any time. He's going to help me monitor the chat box and the Q&A box. So feel free to jump in at any time, and we will leave some time at the end for questions as well. So with that, I'll just jump right in and give a little bit of background. I think a lot of folks are probably pretty familiar overall with the program, but just a quick mention that this is a program of the Washington State Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. It's been going since the 2005-2007 biennium. And it was determined at that time that counties had these wonderful courthouses that really faced a lot of capital needs. And the legislature saw fit to provide some funding for matching grants for rehabilitation projects, historic preservation projects to those courthouses. So with that, let's see, I'll keep going forward. Just I like to kind of show our bookended courthouses on, if you think of it as sort of a timeline, the time spectrum. The Columbia County Courthouse in Dayton is our oldest operating courthouse in the state. Beautiful building, beautiful courtroom inside. And if you bookend that with a courthouse from the recent past, Kittitas County in Ellensburg, this is an international style courthouse, and it's from 1955. So it is certainly historic by the standards that we have in place. The threshold for a building, a resource being historic, is 50 years. So if you think of it from that standpoint, right now, any building that was built in 1970 could potentially be eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. And that's how we deem eligibility for the courthouse grant program, is whether or not a county courthouse is eligible for listing in the National Register or the Washington State Heritage Register. So just a little bit more background. That assessment that I mentioned was actually done in 2003. So by 2005, there was some funding allocated. And to date, the grant funding has been awarded to 26 counties to complete. And actually, I failed to update this slide. I apologize. It's actually to complete 65 courthouse projects. So we are up to, actually check that, 66 courthouse projects. So we've done now 66 courthouse projects across the state in those 26 counties. And obviously I failed to update the August 1st deadline, which is actually an okay segue, because we are going to push back the deadline for applications. You will have noted perhaps in the materials and application forms that the deadline was June 24th of this year. I think we have a fairly good understanding that a lot of counties, every single county, in fact, has been hit pretty hard as a result of the COVID pandemic. And so we want to help accommodate as much as we can. So the new deadline will be July 22nd. We're going to push it back a month. So please note that July 22nd, 2020 will be that deadline. Okay, I want to jump right into program particulars, and this is where truly, if there are any questions, feel free to jump in. Oh, I stopped sharing the screen by mistake. I'm going to go back to do that. I did want to open my chat box. Okay, thank you. So the eligible activities, really this year, this round more than ever, the steering committee, which oversees the program and makes funding recommendations, really wants to see a focus on state grant dollars going to preservation projects, those projects that really do address character defining architectural features of the courthouse, whether it's exterior features or interior. So certainly improvements to courthouse accessibility and accommodations for persons with disabilities made in conjunction with historic rehab is eligible. Seismic retrofits, because those directly impact the historic character of the building. Some of the differences in this coming cycle from the past cycle would be with system upgrades, things like HVAC or mechanical, and general repairs that aren't historic in nature. In the past, state grant dollars could go to those specific activities. Moving forward, those activities will be eligible for the county's required match, but not as reimbursable through the state grant dollars. And I'll get more into that as we go through. But the important piece is that only historic projects that address historic character defining features are eligible for state grants to be reimbursed by the state dollars. Other projects can count toward the match. So ineligible. General courthouse maintenance is absolutely ineligible either to be reimbursed or count as the match. This is not intended to be a just general maintenance program. Architectural engineering fees are not eligible for reimbursement, but as noted here, they can count toward the match, provided that they're the fees that are associated with the project for which you're applying for grant funds. Project planning, very similar. We cannot reimburse the planning side of it, but such expenditures can be used as part of the required match if there needs to be some sort of assessment or some plan put in place. And then obviously lobbying is an ineligible activity for either reimbursement or match, as is debt service. Okay, the evaluation criteria have changed just a little bit, and they haven't so much changed as they've been collapsed into a few into fewer categories. But the first is those listed in the National Register of Historic Places or the Washington Heritage Register. That is not a sort of scorable criteria, as if you will. It is literally a threshold criteria. If the courthouse is not eligible for listing in either of those registers, then it's not eligible for the program. There are 33 courthouses across the state eligible, and I think I've reached out to county officials and staff in all 33 of those with word that they are eligible, sent the application documents and so on and so forth. So we hopefully have covered everybody there. The next elements are scorable pieces. Public visibility of work that addresses the historic character defining features. So, are these exterior features that people see as they come to the courthouse, that people can enjoy as they are driving or walking by? Are they important visible elements on the interior, main foyers, architectural features that someone just coming to visit the courthouse is going to see right off the bat? Number 3, degree of urgency. How important is this? What amount of that historic fabric might be lost forever if action isn't taken in the near term? So that's an important criteria. Projects that do assist in providing structural and life safety. So this really addresses the accessibility and seismic retrofit pieces. if there is work that can be done to seismically improve buildings that might be unreinforced masonry structures or have elements that are unreinforced masonry, or to simply further stabilize buildings that already have retrofits. Those are important considerations as well. So projects that have match in hand at time of application. So this is a kind of where your funding is coming from, where your match will be coming from. The committee wants to know, is this match that the county has dedicated already to the project? Is it funds, are they funds that still must be appropriated by commissioners? Is it dependent on certain revenues being at a certain level? Does it require a levy or bond measure, a vote of the people? So those, the committee just wants to understand where the match is coming from. Project feasibility is really kind of our overall readiness piece. Do you have designs in hand? Is there an architect on board? What's the timeline look like? So on and so forth. And then the last one, and this is one that's been in place for a while, and I'll go over it more later, but it is the percentage of requested state funding the applicant intends to match. So the courthouse program does have a required match. Every county must match a certain percentage. The way this is scored is on a sliding scale. So if a county requests $100,000 for a project and matches it with $100,000 of local county funds, that county would score the highest point total for that, for this criterion. It would be that full one-to-one match. That said, the minimum required is 25%. So if you take that same scenario and a county were asking for $100,000, the minimum they would be required to match is 25% of that, or 25,000, for a total project of 125. And so where a county decides to provide match along that scale will determine how many quote unquote points they score in that category as far as review goes. The minimum, that 25% match would score the least amount of points. The one-to-one full 100% match would score the most. And it basically ramps up at 25%, 50%, 75%, 100% are the thresholds of that scoring. So hopefully that makes sense to folks. This is not a new criteria. We've had this sliding scale in place for several biennia now, so it should be familiar to most. And I'll show you guys, show everyone in a budget example what that looks like on paper. Okay, program, some of the other just program particulars. The way the state budget works is expenditures that counties expect or anticipate to be reimbursed. Those have to be made within the biennium that the funds are allocated. So we're looking at the 21-23 biennium. So expenditures anticipated for reimbursement cannot be made prior to July 1 of 2021. And then furthermore cannot be made until there's actually a contract in place between the agency, Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, and the county. You cannot incur expenses anticipated for reimbursement before a contract is in place. Similarly, those expenditures the county expects to use as match must also be expended, but in that same time frame, July 1, 2021 to June 30th, 2023. The exception, and this is not new either, this is something we've had in place for I think the lifetime of the program actually, is that there's an understanding that county projects, capital projects to courthouses don't necessarily occur exactly on our grant cycle. So if there is a project that the county has already completed, well, I should say completed after January 1 of 2020, or expects to be working on and have in progress before July 1 of 2021, expenditures on that project can count as match. They can't be reimbursed because it would be before July 1, 2021, but they can count as match for your new project that the grant funds would be committed to. The requirement, of course, is that the project that you are using the count as match must meet all of the other program criteria, must be, historic in nature, or meet the Secretary of Interior standards. So it's a way to acknowledge that counties still have work that they're doing on courthouses, and we don't want you to lose out on the potential of those expenditures to be used as match, provided those expenditures were made after January 1, 2020. Any questions right now, just to take a quick pause when we look at kind of the way expenditures can fit? Okay, and I'll try and take a pause at different points to review questions again. Again, last bullet point, only those project elements that are really preservation projects, really deal with the historic character defining features, are going to be eligible for grant funds in the next cycle. Again, other projects can be used for match, but the grant projects need to be preservation projects. Okay, I referred to the standards for rehabilitation of historic properties. Again, all work must comply with those standards, whether it's the work and expenditures going toward the match or grants expenditures anticipated to be reimbursed with grant funds. All work must comply, and that holds true again for any work occurring prior to July 1 of 2021 that you plan to use as match. This 5-year rehabilitation standards compliance requirement is basically says that counties that accept grant funds will agree to comply with the rehabilitation standards for a period of 5 years following completion of the project. How does that compliance happen? We basically say if you are going to be involved in a big capital project on the courthouse, you consult with us, consult with program staff on what you plan to do, and we'll work with you, provide some guidance and advice on ensuring that the capital project moving forward does meet those rehabilitation guidelines and doesn't adversely impact the courthouse. The standards are, it doesn't mean anytime you change a light bulb or need to paint something or need to make a patch that you need to come to us. It's really for major capital projects that you might be doing moving forward. And the standards for rehabilitation, we have links to those, but in short, they don't require a building to be frozen in time. We understand these aren't museum buildings; these are active, used properties and sites and buildings. So really, what the rehabilitation standards, which are very specific, rehabilitation is a specific term, understands that buildings do change over time, that you might have to adapt a building for new uses to meet new requirements, new regulations, but that when you do so, you take the historic character into consideration. You identify those elements which are important and significant enough that they really need to be saved and not altered, and work that way. It doesn't mean there can't be additions. There can be additions to courthouses. There can be changes, but it's taking those primary character features and making sure that they're not adversely impacted. So that's a 5-year piece. The enforcement of that is such that basically what the department has said is if a county fails to comply with that 5-year standards agreement, that they're basically not eligible for funding from the program in the future. And at this point, as I mentioned, we've done 66 projects, and we haven't had a situation where any county has ended up ineligible because of something they've done prior to their grant project. National Register, Washington Heritage Register listing, as I mentioned, you must be eligible, the courthouse must be eligible for listing in either or both of those registers to apply for the program. Many of our county courthouses are already listed on the National Register. If you're not, and you do receive a grant, the requirement is that within 1 year of project completion, you've submitted a nomination for that National Register listing. And I will note that National Register listing is honorary only. There are no regulations associated with it, but it's something that we want to see happen for counties that do receive state funding to get them on the National Register. It is an honorary listing. Grant funds available on a reimbursement basis only. So I mentioned that because it does become a cash flow issue for counties. You have to do the work and then ask for reimbursement. And the match dollar needs to be the first dollar in. So easy to calculate with the dollar for dollar match. If you are have $100,000 grant project, you're matching it with 100,000. It's 200,000 total. Let's say you get halfway through, you've done $100,000 of work. You want to do a progress reimbursement payment. You can submit that, and you would be reimbursed for 50,000, with the match being the first dollar in. So hopefully that makes sense. But they're done on a reimbursement basis only, with the match dollar being the first dollar in. For projects that have a scale percentage of match, it would be prorated accordingly. So this is new for this year, this last bullet point, and this is that courthouse projects in counties defined as distressed will receive extra consideration. It doesn't guarantee funding for projects in distressed counties, but the committee has decided that they want to provide some extra consideration for counties that are identified as distressed. Now, as I understand distressed counties, it's a function of unemployment. And so obviously things are going to look a little bit different right now than they did when the committee was looking to put these put this application together. And so what we will be doing is referencing the distressed counties are identified by, I believe, oh gosh, I've got to go back and look at which department it is, but it's either Department of Commerce or it might even be L&I, which makes that determination. So we will look at that. And I think how it will run is at the time that we are reviewing them, those counties that are defined as distressed would receive that extra consideration. So I'm going to take a moment in case people have questions. I know there's a couple up here that I want to address. So one is I have confirmed the A&E expenses during 18 months prior to July 1. So I believe what is being asked here is that if you have A&E expenses that you incur before July 1 of 2021, can those A&E expenses be used toward the county's match, assuming that those expenses are incurred for the project for which you're applying for grant funds? Yes, absolutely. They can count toward match. And even if there are any expenses that are incurred for another project that gets done prior to then, it's still a capital project and they can still count toward match. So hopefully that answers that question. And then a second follow-up question is typical cost or level of effort required to apply for the National Register. It's a great question. There are architectural preservation consultants out there who will do National Register applications. And I've seen them for as little as $2,500 or $5,000. I've seen them for $10,000 as well. But what I like to tell folks is, especially when it's a county courthouse involved, the National Register process, the nomination it's almost an aggrandized book report. It is, there's a good template for it. We have examples of other counties that have done National Register listings for their courthouses, and those would serve as really good templates for any other county. I always encourage people to reach out to, most counties have a county historical society, and reach out to that historical society and see if they might have a volunteer. Oftentimes those historical societies have volunteers that love to do historic research. And it's a great volunteer project that can be done through a historical society or someone who might have an interest in that. It may take a little longer from that standpoint, but the state Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation has on staff an architectural historian. His name is Michael Hauser, and he's really great about working with nominators to the National Register to get documents in place and get everything up and running. So yeah, you can build it into a project budget and work with a consultant to do that. But I would certainly encourage folks to think about reaching out to local historical societies or volunteers, or there might be a Boy Scout or Girl Scout trying to earn their preservation badge, which actually does exist, an Eagle Scout perhaps, and that could be a way as well. We do have, looks like one other, oh, that was just the questions in the Q&A box. Okay. All right. I'm going to move forward and go on to the next piece. And this is just some particulars about the review. It's the Courthouse Steering Committee that will be reviewing the applications. And the way it works is, of all the applications that are received, assuming they're eligible projects and meet the threshold criteria, the committee will essentially rank those projects in a prioritized order from 1 through whatever. If there's 10 applications, 1 through 10. If there's 20, 1 through 20. And then that list of ranked projects will be submitted to the agency, to the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, which in turn will submit that as part of their agency request to the Office of Financial Management for the next biennium's capital budget. Where it goes from there is up to OFM and the governor, where they will take that list. I can say for the current biennium that we are in, I believe there were, as I recall, there were 10 projects that were forwarded by the agency to the Office of Financial Management for consideration, and the top 7 were funded. There is no cap on the amount that can be requested, and then work must be complete by June 30th of 2023. A quick note on that June 30th of 2023, we certainly have had a situation where there have been reappropriations. If a project is not complete by June 30th of 2023, does that mean it is done and funding is lost? Not necessarily. If it's anticipated that a county is going to be unable to complete a project by that time frame because of delays or unforeseen circumstances, then the agency can seek a reappropriation request from the legislature for that project. There's no guarantee that they will get it. So what I try to caution people about, or encourage counties to do, is meet that June 30th deadline of 2023 for project completion. Now, that said, we have had reappropriations every single year the program has been in operation. So there's yet to be a circumstance where the legislature failed to reappropriate funding for a project that needed an extension. So the track record is reappropriations come through, but as everyone knows, we're just in a different world, and I don't know what's going to happen from a legislative standpoint as budgets are in trouble and as they try to look at savings. So I think the best advice is for those counties that do receive grants, work to be complete by June 30th, 2023. Again, you see the grant application deadline. This was a slide I did update that shows the new date of July 22nd, 2020. So we've really pushed it out just about a month from what it had been earlier. Okay, I just wanted to go through some pieces on the actual application. The historic designation, I always just tell folks, if you're not sure, ask. As I mentioned, a number of the county courthouses are already listed, but if you aren't sure, just ask, let me know, shoot me an email, and I can let you know right away. Project summary, I just wanted to note that, and I'm gonna actually do a quick screen share with another, I've also got the actual application up here. Since we're using Zoom, I can do it this way too. Just be sure on the project summary, the question asks for the amount the county is requesting in grant funds, not the total project cost. So just be sure to only include the grant request here. And then the brief summary description of the proposed project. There's time later in the application to go into more detail. So really, this is just a brief summary description is all we're looking for on that piece. Okay. The project description. What we ask people to do is organize your project into no more than 5 work elements. And so you can, it's not like an architectural division that you would see on, say, a bid package or specs package. But what we want folks to do is organize your work project into no more than 5 elements that make sense. So it could be, you know, if you're doing, say, a window rehabilitation and repairing a historic parapet, those could both fall under exterior rehabilitation and be kind of one work element. The narrative will, and let's see, do I have it on here? Yeah. So the narrative section, you can go and identify the major components or activities of each work element. But in terms of the 5 overall elements, you can certainly lump those together. And then the reason we keep it to 5 is we want to have no more than 5 elements that are part of the project budget. And so the example of this is in the application itself. When you get to section 5, you'll see work element 1 and an area where you can provide more details on that work element. There are 5 sections of those. And so when you see, say you type in our first work element's roof replacement, when you get to the budget, it'll actually self-populate. So those, however many work elements you have, will self-populate here onto the budget, which hopefully keeps things simplified and streamlined as part of the application process, so that these elements self-populate. Okay. Let me go the other way. Again, with those work elements, find the lump: exterior rehabilitation, interior rehabilitation, you know, structural stabilization, whatever makes sense from that kind of broader umbrella standpoint. And so those 5 work elements, as I mentioned, must be used from the budget sheet. They will by default because they self-populate. And then we also break out A&E fees as a separate section overall. So this is where I want to go through a number of the different budget scenarios and what they would look like. So this is a real simple one. This is just saying, hey, there's a $100,000 grant request. No, I take that back. Sorry. It's a total project cost of $120,000. That includes $10,000 in architectural and engineering fees that you see here. It includes $10,000 in a contingency, and I really encourage all counties to include that contingency piece in there. And then we look at construction costs as $100,000. So overall, these are your expenses for a simple roof replacement. Totals $120,000. What it looks like on the grant side, this is a situation where a county is providing the full dollar-for-dollar match, or a 50-50, if you want to think of it that way. So they're asking for $60,000 in grants, and then proposed match is $50,000 of the construction costs the county will match, and then the A&E fees, which is broken out down here, is the $10,000 in A&E. It just transfers from expenses over to the income side because it's got to come from the county. It's not eligible for reimbursement. So you see the breakdown overall: 60-60. Grant request is 60. Total value of match is 60,000 as well. Okay. So that's the simple dollar for dollar match. And I'm going to go to, let's see, we had a chat, another. Why is my chat box not coming up? Let me, oh wait, here we go. Oh, okay. It sounds like there might be just a question on whether a potential project is eligible. Jenny, let me get through this, and then at the Q&A at the end, we'll have a chance to unmute people and you can ask then. Does that sound okay? All right. Go back to the screen share. Okay, here's one where we're looking at a, did I go too far ahead? Yeah, I did. Okay. Here's one, same scenario, roof replacement for $120,000, but this is one where the county is asking for $90,000 in grants and is only going to put up $30,000. So they're basically matching 33%, which is eligible. It's allowable. They won't score high on that sliding match criteria, but it's certainly eligible. And I just want to point this out because I would not hesitate. Again, given the current economic situation, it's going to be tough on a lot of counties. And if a county is unable to provide that full dollar for dollar match, I would not want a county to hesitate at all to just lower the amount of match they're going to put forward and submit an application. So this is one where you see the grant request is $90,000. The county's going to match $20,000 of the construction costs. The A&E still has to be matched because, again, not reimbursable, but the total match comes in at 30, total grant is 90, and you see that broken out. So a simple example. Here's one where we look at multiple elements. Overall project is $350,000. Again, this is a situation where you've got multiple elements being matched at that dollar for dollar level. Overall A&E fees are $20,000, so that automatically goes into the cash match side on the part of the county. And this is just one way to split up the actual grant request versus cash matching for the construction elements. You've got $110,000 for the roof replacement, broken up by 60 and 50. You've got 220 broken up by 115, 105. You ultimately end up with a $175,000 grant request and $175,000 in match. Okay. The next one looks, again, same project costs, what it looks like if there were a little bit of, if the county were only providing 40% match rather than the full dollar for dollar. And it just gives another scenario of how those can be broken out. The key thing to remember is that when we put together a contract budget, we can really finesse the numbers or assign grant to match numbers any way we want, with the exception of those elements that are not eligible for reimbursement. Those have to be all in the match side, on the county local share side, like A&E fees. But otherwise, we can work with the ratios or the amounts of grants versus match. But typically, what we like to do is set that up so that if a county is doing multiple elements and they are working toward implementing one element first and then maybe seeking a progress payment, we want to make sure that we've assigned some reimbursable grant funds to that first element so that when it's completed, you actually can get some grant funds back. If we had done this where all of the grant dollars were on the roof replacement and all of the match dollars were on the window side, and the window work was done first, the county can't apply for any reimbursement if there's no grant dollars assigned for the window rehabilitation. So hopefully that makes sense. As I say, we can sequence things and assign grant versus match accordingly, but that's what we aim to do. And then one more scenario. Actually, I've got two more scenarios. This one has prior capital expenditures in it. So same base here, same base example, but we've added front entry accessibility, and that was completed prior to the grant period, prior to the biennium, but which costs were eligible for reimbursement, or excuse me, eligible to count as match. So you see the construction costs, they just carry over to this third column of prior capital expenditures. And you'll see down here, the footnote, prior capital expenditures must be properly documented and have occurred. This should read January 1st, 2020. So not January 1st, 2018. This is an older slide, but that should read January 1st, 2020. So those capital expenditures would slide over here. And what it basically does is adds another 50,000 in match that the county has essentially kind of in the bank. They won't be new expenditures because they've already been spent, but they can count, those expenditures can count toward as match for the new project. So it in essence allows the county to recapture more grant dollars on the new projects given the match. This is one where the total grant requested was 205, total match was 205. This was the full dollar for dollar match. And then my final scenario is one where you have an increased grant to match ratio. This is one where rather than a full dollar for dollar match, the county was matching at 67%. Same scenario, construction costs that were prior to the biennia move over here to prior capital expenditures. And then you can see how the breakdown falls for the construction costs for the other two elements and the grant requests associated with those. So this is one where they just said, look, we've got, because of our prior capital expenditures, we're going to ask for the full reimbursement of all of the roof work. And then we'll split the window work out between grant dollars and local match. You still come out to a total project of 410,000, and you see the request versus the match, and that's about a 67% match compared to that request. Okay, so that's a number of different scenarios for how you can do it. This fourth column, to be quite honest, I'm not sure I've ever seen it used. The program does allow for what we call in-kind match, which is, in short, volunteer labor. And it's not labor that is paid in any way, shape, and form. It's truly volunteer labor. So if someone were to volunteer their time, you can count their hours. We place a value on what those hours are, and they can be counted as the match. We rarely see this simply because these aren't courthouse capital projects, aren't really conducive to volunteer time so much. They're usually big projects that are bid by a construction crew, and there's really not a lot of volunteer labor that gets involved. But if you do have it, if there's an element of a project that you've got a volunteer who would like to do that, for instance, actually that would count, but someone working on a few windows, that might be someone who's a carpenter that wanted to do some work or something like that. Those could be volunteer hours. The rule is that no more than half of the county match can be an in-kind or volunteer hours. So if you've got a project where you have $50,000 in county match going into it, no more than 25,000 can be in kind. The other, at least 25,000, must be cash match. And one thing that I want to note here, because we do have a situation where counties, project management for county staff working with the construction company, working on bids, project management costs can count as the county match, can count toward matching the local match. It really would be a cash match because the county's paying those staff to project manage. So that would be factored into the cash match, not to in-kind. Okay, are there any other, I'll take a moment right now and see if there are any other questions, knowing that I've got one to get to just regarding overall project eligibility. Okay, good. Let's see, the last piece I'll go through is just the feasibility piece, and this is that section about feasibility that I mentioned earlier. Deals with funding source and source of matching funds, talks about implementation, whether you've got designs and things like that in place. And then this section's the timeline section. And really what we want to see here is a detailed list of project activity, your estimated start date, estimated completion date, and then the related work element. And so what's important to note is this field will, again, this drop-down menu will populate based on the identified work elements from section 5. So if you had window replacement, roof rehab, roof replacement and window rehab as your two work elements, the drop-down menu would only have those two work elements. And this is where you can take the opportunity to be more detailed in the specific activity. Again, we don't need to know, every little single element that's going to happen, but with a little bit more detail. If one of your work elements is exterior rehabilitation, and that's going to include window rehab and parapet reconstruction, this is where you might say, okay, remove existing windows. When's it going to start? When's it going to completion? That would be the window side of it. And then it would be, get the molds for the new balusters, and so on and so forth. So you can be a little more detailed in the project activity. Again, we don't need to know every single day what's going to happen, but it allows for some expansion. And project completion date is June 30th of 2023. My apologies, I need to go over these a little more carefully before I reuse slides, but June 30th of 2023. Okay, a few other just particulars that are asked. I won't go over all of these. These are questions taken directly from the courthouse application itself, but the committee wanted to know and understand how the courthouse is going to continue to function. One of the requirements of eligibility is that the courthouse must still be used for county purposes. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a courthouse itself. In some cases, we have counties that have now a larger county campus or have built a new jail or courtroom somewhere off-site. That's okay. The courthouse does not necessarily need to have a courtroom in it any longer, as long as the courthouse serves some county function. So that is the baseline there. And then the rest of the questions deal with some of the longer term maintenance and treatment for the building. I went over the required county match, that sliding scale, so I don't want to go over that anymore. The last requirement's a statement of support. We do need a statement of support from the commissioners or county council as appropriate for your county. It doesn't have to be a resolution, doesn't need to be that official, but some statement of support that acknowledges on the part of the commissioners or council that an application is being submitted and that they support that. I talked about the National Register of Historic Places and the requirement there. Local register. So many counties where many county seats are have a local register of historic places. And in some cases, but not all, your county courthouse might be listed in that local register. If so, there may be a process by which the county needs to abide in terms of getting a certificate of appropriateness for work from their local historic preservation commission. Our rule is if you are in a local, if the courthouse is a locally listed landmark and is under the jurisdiction of a local preservation commission, you are required to go through that process and comply with it. It can be done really in concurrently with review that happens at the state level for projects as well. And I'm happy to talk to people further about what that looks like. I don't know that we have a ton of courthouses in that situation, but I do know there are a handful of county courthouses that are listed in their local register as well, which is a really, again, a really nice thing. And then lastly, the standards compliance, which we've gone over. This is just a list, and it's certainly not exhaustive, but it's a list of some of your typical features that would be considered character defining features, provided that they are original or have been historic reproductions of such. So again, maintenance not eligible. And then finally, this is just, I talked about rehabilitation being a very specific term. This is it. This is rehabilitation defined. And that link, which is probably going to be hard to write down, but that link will take you to there are 10 standards for rehabilitation, which go into more detail as to how those are, to what the guidelines are as a county or as anyone is going through the rehabilitation process. I've got some other slides that just show some images of projects, but before I do that, I want to just take a moment now, and if people have questions they want to ask, either by typing in, or Jason, if you wanted to unmute folks. I know it looked like Jenny Fashing had a question. that she wanted to
Chris,
ask?
this
Yeah.
is Jason. She actually said that she'll ask you
Oh,
privately. She didn't want to tie up the group
no problem. Okay,
with her
that's fine.
question, but yeah.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. You can email me directly, or you can call me at your convenience, whatever is easiest for you. And then I don't know if anyone else has any other questions at this point about how anything works, funding, reimbursement.
And just a reminder for those that are joining us by Zoom, you can click on the raise your hand icon at the bottom if you want to ask your question, and we'll unmute you. Otherwise, you can submit your question via the question answer box. And it looks like we just got one that came in from Ben Eggleston.
Yeah, so maintenance versus rehabilitation, that's a great question. If it's general cyclical maintenance, it's not going to score really well by the committee. And so some examples, painting. Oh, we need to do some interior painting. That's not going to be considered a real preservation project. We've had some come through where people have wanted to polish some marble or rebuff some terracotta, or excuse me, some terrazzo. That would be considered maintenance. What I tell folks is there might be elements of both of those, whether it's painting or whether it is repolishing. And the way to frame it is as, a restoration. We want to restore some terrazzo. We want to restore the marble, or there's been some damage to something, damage to historic elements, and we need to repair it from that standpoint. So I think there's some strategic ways to present the project as part of a rehabilitation or restoration piece, and not just cyclical maintenance. If it's kind of like, oh, we just, it's time for us to repaint, it's time for us to do some polishing, that's not going to work. But if it is, say, there's a drop ceiling in a public room, and we know there's original features underneath, well, we want to remove the drop ceiling, and part of exposing those features means painting them with historically appropriate colors and doing whatever restoration work might be needed to some historic woodwork, or to the ceiling. Then that becomes a great preservation project because it is revealing the historic fabric that had not been, that presently is not visible. So painting can be a part of that because it's part of the preservation project. So hopefully that helps out a little bit. And I am absolutely will work with any county on that issue. If there's elements of work that might seem to be kind of walking the line, is it maintenance? Is it rehab? I think we can work with you to present it in a way that it can become part of a package of preservation work. But it's that stuff that's just really cyclical maintenance is going to be it's not going to be as competitive as other pieces. Something like masonry restoration, if you need to repoint, that is not considered cyclical maintenance, at least from my standpoint. We would look at, masonry work is oftentimes, when that's being done, it's not being done just to repoint. It's being done because there's other damage to the masonry and there needs to be some repair to it. So that's one that people say, well, the masonry hasn't been done in 50 years or 60 years. We need to do it. Is that cyclical? I would call masonry, repointing a true rehabilitation project that obviously addresses character defining features. So something like that, I think falls squarely within. Let me show a few examples, and it will hopefully make bring to light or illustrate some of the different types of projects. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but this is the Douglas County Courthouse, and one of the things, it is listed in the National Register, and this is an addition that came on later, was totally approved, was seen as not a problem. This addition didn't compete with the original historic building. It maintained some materials in the stone that reflected the original courthouse. So the addition was added and totally approved and looked, was done in a way that complemented and fit within the historic building. So this is one where Spokane County Courthouse did some front entry work. These doors were probably historic in their own right. They had probably been, were over 50 years old, but they weren't the original doors. And the county wanted to go back to what was there originally. They had the original designs for the building, so they knew, and they were able to have that be part of a larger project. You can see they retained the poles. The door poles were original and had been reused on the metal doors that went in. So they kept those and they're still in place. Similarly, on the interior, they had their original doors were pulled out and storefronts were put in. They kept the hardware and were able to go back to what was there. Okay. It doesn't, for some reason, my chat doesn't like to come up. There we go. Oh, that was just Jason, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, that was just me.
That's okay, that's okay. Again, just Wahkiakum County Courthouse, a storefront piece. They had their original entry doors had been replaced by more commercial storefronts, and they went back and restored them again, looking at original plans. So those are just some great, true rehabilitation projects. Energy efficiency. So this is one where we would look at this now and probably say in Walla Walla County, they were putting new windows in to increase energy efficiency and get rid of other windows. These were not the original windows to the courthouse. So those were already gone. And what you can see is what had been there. They replicated what would have been there, used metal-clad wood frame windows. So we did require the windows to be wood frame, but they could be metal-clad to help with maintenance issues. So this now could very likely be considered not necessarily historic, but work that could count toward the county's required match, because you're not, this is in some ways a systems piece to get more efficiency. And we don't have the historic fabric to begin, but it's still a good piece for character defining features as well, because it does bring back a look. So this is one where a county could try and seek grant funds for the window work, or could use that as match. And I think it would be a good example to talk about with counties. And that's what it looked like after they got all the replication windows in. It's a big improvement to what had been just metal, kind of extruded aluminum windows. This is one where the window work was truly a historic piece as well as energy efficiency. So here you can see in Stevens County, they had their original steel frame windows, and they were able to get those essentially restored and added, I forget if they actually added storm windows or if they were able to actually insert double pane glass into the frames. I think they actually did storm windows here, but they did rehab the windows themselves. And because they had the original historic windows, absolutely eligible for grant funding. This King County, I mentioned this because this was an accessibility piece. This was making some ADA, some bathrooms that were not ADA accessible, making them accessible. And so this is one where you can apply for grant funding for some of the ADA accessibility because it deals directly with preservation. And out of that, you can get some additional things like terrazzo restoration or marble restoration, kind of as part of that, considered as part of that project. They needed to widen the door. And so now this is an accessible bathroom where it had not been in the past. A really good example, Snohomish County Courthouse, of exterior work, all of which is character defining, all of which is eligible on the grant side of things. You can see some of the before elements. The roof needed work, exterior features needed work, delamination of some of the plaster, and this was part of a project that really was a full exterior rehabilitation. And in the end, that woodwork was brought back. And this is not just cyclical maintenance. This was not, oh, we need to, paint the corbels again. It's been 5 years. This was the fact that there'd been a certain amount of deterioration. Okay. Pacific County Courthouse, this was a roof replacement. and replace some of the systems up there, and they needed that full replacement. Roofs can be tricky because the question the committee is going to ask is the roof a character defining feature? And for Pacific County Courthouse, I think the answer is clearly yes. When you look at that roof, it's a character defining component with the dome, which holds stained glass inside it. You can see that's the inside structure, and then the superstructure over it is the roof. That's a character defining feature. If a building has a flat roof, is, re-roofing a flat roof with some kind of membrane, is that going to be a competitive project for grant dollars from a character defining feature standpoint? Probably not, because a flat roof isn't as much of a character defining feature. Now, the roof replacement work could absolutely count toward the match. There's no question about that, but it might be less competitive as a character defining feature. And then they were able to restore Pacific County. You can see up along here, the balusters had been missing since, I think, post-World War II. They were actually part of their project to restore them. And so what you get is great. They had been missing for 50 years, but the county wanted to bring that back, and that was certainly an eligible portion of their project. Okay, we are at 11 o'clock. I want to stop here. I want to thank everyone for their time and being a part of this. And I'm going to just go forward real quick to, I didn't get through all my slides, but at least I'll put my phone number and email up there. Most of you hopefully have it already. Don't hesitate to reach out. Normally, I would offer to come to the county and look at potential projects and take a look at them. That's part of the reason we've pushed the deadline back till July 22nd. I am hoping to still be able to do that. Obviously, as it is now, that won't happen before June. We're still under the governor's stay-home order, which runs through May 31st. My hope is that in June, we'll be allowed to do some travel again, and I will be hitting the road, assuming that is the case, and we'll be happy to stop at any of your courthouses to go over possible projects and meet with you, with commissioners, any county staff that want to meet. So with that, I'll say thanks very much and turn it back over to Jason.
Thank you so much, Chris. As Chris mentioned on screen, you should see his email address and work number. I also put that in the chat box, but we encourage you to reach out to Chris if you have any follow-up questions or you want to talk to him about a specific project off Zoom. I was also going to say, Chris, if they had an opportunity to like send you photographs as part of reaching out about a project, would that be helpful since you can't meet in person right now to see some of these projects?
Absolutely. And I have been to, every one of the courthouses that are eligible for this program, I've been to. So I know every one of your courthouses, not as well as you, of course, but I know them pretty well and have a good sense of them. But happy to review images, happy to set up a Zoom meeting as well, so we can have a virtual face-to-face. But anything that works for counties, I'm certainly happy to accommodate, provided it falls within the stay-home guidelines.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for participating in today's Zoom. As I mentioned at the very beginning, we're going to make sure this was recorded, so we'll share it out probably by Friday. It'll be posted on WASEC's YouTube page, but it'll also be emailed out and be posted on our website as well. So we'll make sure that gets out. And we want to wish you all a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.